And welcome to Refresh Your Future. This afternoon I'm joined by Liz, who's going to be talking to us about funding. So Liz, can you just explain who you are and how long you've been with the company?
Yeah, my name's Liz Hemmings. I'm the Systems and Compliance Manager. Been with Busy Bees Education and Training just over 2 years now. And me and my team deal with all the information systems and all the funding aspects related to apprenticeships and learners.
Keeps you busy then?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, lovely. So could you tell me, I've got some questions here for you. Can any company take on an apprentice?
They can. The only time you can't take on an apprentice is when you're self-employed.
Right, okay.
That would be the only circumstance where you wouldn't be able to. Any company can take on an apprentice. It would depend how many apprentices that they can take on, depending on their levy, whether they are a levy or a non-levy employer. But there's no restriction in terms of, it just depends how much you want to spend, basically, as an employer.
So you talk about levy and non-levy. So what is a levy company?
So a levy company pays £3 million or more on their pay bill.
Right, okay.
Over the year, and they pay 0.5% of that into what's called a levy account on a monthly basis. And currently it's around 2% of employers in England that actually pay the apprenticeship levy. All others are classed as non-levy. And that's how it's established. It's purely based on your payroll bill.
So if I was a levy company, I could have as many apprentices as I liked in the business?
Yes, you can. The only thing is, with the apprenticeship levy, you pay that contribution every month that is stored in your digital account. And should you choose to use that funding and you exceed that amount, you're then expected to contribute 5% of the cost that's agreed with your training provider to them for that apprenticeship programme.
That's still worth doing though, isn't it? So providing for the future. Lovely. So explain to me what's a non-levy. I know you obviously are presuming it's to do with their salary bill, but what is the stipulations whether how many apprentices a non-levy setting could take on? Or
since the 1st of April this year, non-levy has gone onto the digital account, and your non-levy companies, employers are allowed to apply for 10 non-levy apprenticeships per tax year, so from the 1st of April. And that is 10 what they call reservations on there.
Right, okay.
So, and that is to use for whatever apprenticeships you want to utilise, as long as they meet the eligibility criteria.
Right. So if they've gone over their 10 apprentices, is there any other options they can do to support them?
There are other options, and it depends on your training provider. At Busy Bees, we'd offer a company-sponsored route. We have adult learner loans, but there are also online courses and also adult education budget funding across England.
And where would they find that? Would they go to the training provider to find that information out for them?
Yes.
Lovely. So can you tell me what is, I heard you talk about the digital account system. Can you explain to me what that is?
Yeah, so the digital account system, or DAS as it's more commonly known, is an employer-driven funding management tool. It was implemented in 2017 to enable employers to utilise their levy contribution more effectively. And like I said, as of the 1st of April, that meant that non-levy employers are now using that system as well. And it's so the government can manage the budget for apprenticeships and for skills and funding for further education. It can be used to allocate and manage your funding pot. So if you are a levy paying employer, you can manage that to make sure you don't exceed your levy pot if you don't want to pay that contribution. You can also suspend that funding. So for example, if a learner goes on maternity leave, you can suspend that funding, and then when they come back, reintroduce that funding. So it's actually putting a pause on that, and you can do that on that system. The other thing that the DAS or digital account does for the employer is at the moment it enables them to apply for the government incentives.
Yeah.
So it's a tool to do that at the moment, and again that's so that the government can manage that pot of funding and see what's coming through in terms of applications for that. And hence, obviously, at the moment, that's been extended to September. That's £3,000 per apprentice.
Wow, so it's a lot of contribution there.
Yeah.
So as a training provider, do we help people with their digital accounts?
Yes, we do. Both the recruitment team and the systems and compliance team support employers with their digital account. At the initial stages, the recruitment team work closely with employers to help them either set up the digital account or work with them to set up learners, and the systems and compliance team work with them closely to make sure that they're managing their funding and working that out as they wish to.
Lovely. Have you got any questions from the floor? I think we've covered everything I had, Liz. Thank you.
Yeah, we do. So someone said, I've heard some councils and other large companies offer to share their levy with other local businesses. Is this common?
Yes, so if an employer, large employer, a levy employer, doesn't utilise all of their levy funding, after 2 years that expires and that goes back to Her Majesty's Government. So to enable those employers to support smaller employers and other employers in their local areas, they can actually do what's called a levy transfer. So they can transfer up to 20% of their levy account funding to those employers to utilise for apprenticeships. And again, the recruitment team and the systems and compliance team would help them and support them with that. And that's both the transferor and the transferee.
Another one is, if an apprentice has left a company but hasn't finished their qualification, what happens to the funding?
Right, so it does depend on whether they've been made redundant. If a learner's made redundant, the funding rules are very different, and particularly during the pandemic. But if they choose to leave the company, they would need to liaise with their new employer to make sure that they are willing to support them and fund them through the remainder of their apprenticeship programme. They would need a digital account, so exactly the same as starting afresh, with make sure they've got a digital account and ensure that that apprenticeship is still applicable in their new role and with their new employer. But they can contact the learning provider that they're currently with, and again, our recruitment team will support and enable learners to move and transition from one employer to another. The only thing they can't do is have a break in employment. So that employment needs to be continuous. So one contract needs to end on a Friday, say for example, and the next one needs to start on Monday to make sure that they can continue that apprenticeship.
Okay, and what happens if an apprentice fails their qualification? Does this affect the funding for the learner?
No, it doesn't. If, for example, the apprentice fails their endpoint assessment, because there's two elements of it for an apprenticeship. There's obviously your learning period where you obtain your knowledge, skills and behaviours. You then enter gateway. So if that's successful, then you go through to endpoint assessment. If you fail endpoint assessment, that doesn't affect the learner's funding, it just affects the learner's outcome. So that does affect whether they obtain an apprenticeship certificate or not.
And lastly, how could you access your digital account, and where can you find out more information about apprenticeships?
Okay, so the information about individual apprenticeships is on the IFATE or the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education website. That will tell you all the apprenticeships that are available in England. From them, once you've established which apprenticeships you're interested in, you can then go to findanapprenticeship.gov.uk, and that will tell you which providers actually provide those specific apprenticeships. And then it will give you the details, the contact details for those providers. My understanding is as well that it's actually, there's some feedback on there and things like that, so you can have a look and see, what quality and experience that those providers have given previously on those websites. So, yeah.
And obviously we've got information on our own website to help guide people to the different apprenticeships that we offer, or the support for their digital account as well. Thank you, Liz. That's been very insightful.
Okay, thank you.